Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings to the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We're in the Calamus section, and we turn now to a little poem called A Glimpse. Now, this is one of the more amazing little snapshots of love, of companionship that we'll pay attention to in this poem. My hope is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, our other Talks with Walt lectures, beginning with inscriptions all the way up through No Labor-Saving Machine. When we turn to our Nortons to get a little bit of background information here on this one, the first line of this Calamus number 29 poem was very slightly revised, we're told, in 1867. And in 1860, revisions indicate that Whitman had considered the more extended title, A Glimpse Caught Through an Interstice. That is to say, a little opening, right? And that idea of the little opening that we're kind of looking through onto something else takes us back, of course, to Song of Myself, passage 11, where you have that voyeur watching what's going on. Let's enjoy the poem. A glimpse. A glimpse through an interstice caught of a crowd of workmen and drivers in a bar room around the stove late of a winter night, and I, unremarked, seated in a corner, of a youth who loves me and whom I love, silently approaching and seating himself near, that he may hold me by the hand. A long while amid the noises of coming and going, of drinking and oath and smutty jest, there we two, content, happy in being together, speaking little, perhaps not a word. Now, the place that I like to begin in my reading of this poem is to take us back to Song of Myself, passage 27. Do you remember this? He says, I merely stir, press, feel with my fingers, and am happy. To touch my person to someone else's is about as much as I can stand. We'll have some sense of that feeling playing out here. First of all, the word glimpse is a very rare word in Leaves of Grass. It's not used very often, and yet think about how all these poems have in many ways been this glimpse. What is it that we tell students who are beginning to be writers? Show, don't tell. The glimpse is, of course, a powerful way to do that. Now, this interest is a kind of a little crack, we might say, a little opening. And to that degree, we're kind of looking through and in, a prism almost, on a simple glimpse, a scene, right? Now, what is that scene? Well, he's going to call it a bar room where there's a bunch of workmen. We might be thinking about the Pfaff's bar that Whitman is supposed to have frequented often, and it was a bar that allowed for a lot of bohemian activity. Some have qualified it as a bar that allowed for certain kinds of gay and homosexual hookups to happen and that kind of thing. Very controversial at the time. And maybe that's what he's referencing here in this. But notice it's a crowd. And then notice it's not of the upper class. It's workmen and drivers. We've said this about Whitman. He loved to spend time with just normal working class Americans in New York in a bar room around the stove, which tells us that it's maybe in the winter, right? As he says, late of a winter night, so it's kind of cold, and so we're all sitting around this bar and the stove. And then you have the alighted verb unmarked, seated in a corner. Now, many have seen Whitman as this artist-poet who sits in the corner and kind of loves to watch, kind of loves to observe, and who will then report back what it is that he's seeing. Very much like mirror light, almost like what we've said about James Joyce and his short stories in Dubliners, to appropriate that kind of almost like a mirror, Aristotelian-like mirror. Remember what we said about this in our study of Hamlet, right? That idea that you look into it and you see yourself reflected back in some way. And then notice the repetition of the word of a youth. And again, we'll come back to that idea of someone young, right? Of a youth who loves me and whom I love. And then notice, silently approaching and seating himself near. This use of the word silence, we'll come back to it with perhaps not a word at the end. That he may hold me by the hand. We think, of course, of our Milton in Paradise Lost and hand-holding at the end. We've read that a number of times. That is to say, I think Whitman was very much influenced by those final lines of Paradise Lost. Now, there's two readings, obviously, of this. One is a literal reading, right? I mean, that is to say, Whitman himself There's some person who came up and sat next to him at a bar. There's another reading of this that is obviously metaphoric. That is to say, while you're literally holding in your hands leaves of grass, you are in some ways approaching, maybe silently, and sitting with Whitman. And this whole poem can be read at that metaphysical level as well, which is what makes it such a fun poem to read, right? A long while amid the noises of coming and going. I told you he loves the word coming. It's all the way through Leaves of Grass, of drinking and oath and smutty jest. Now, he gets in the smutty jest, I think, to try to differentiate what kind of love or friendship he's experiencing versus what's maybe going on with the rest. And this idea of sitting somehow outside of the rest of the group, observing the group but not being part of the group, is a huge part of Whitman's project, I think. There, we think about we two boys together clinging, there it is, we two. There, we two, content, right? Think about Song of Myself, passage 21, I sit content. Happy, we just finished reading, of course, in Song of Myself, passage 27, happy, right? In being together. The word together is used again and again and again in the Calamus section for obvious reasons, right? Speaking little, and then the word that Whitman loves to throw into Leaves of Grass over and over again, the word perhaps. Perhaps not a word. In other words, what? Well, the true artist appreciates community, and it is a communication which can transcend even words itself, right? At 2b, all of those echoes, especially from Song of Myself, passage 27, I want to highlight. At 3a, this may shock you at first, but I want to challenge you to think about how this little poem works so well with Conrad's Heart of Darkness or O Youth. Remember in our study of O Youth where he'll pause and it's past the bottle, or Marlowe will break for a moment, and you have this sense of a glimpse, a looking into an event that's transpiring or has transpired, and you somehow are there with the person telling the story. I think Whitman is very much playing along with that. And then finally, to own a poem like this, what was a time that you were with your pal and didn't even have to speak a word because you were content and you were happy, and perhaps no word needs be said at all? Thank you.